how do you really predict what you're going to see out of both of these athletes, right? The sample size for Jon Jones at heavyweight is small, and Stipe Miocic last competed against Francis Ngannou when he was 38, and he is now 42 years of age. Now, one thing I can tell you, without sitting down with Stipe in a fighter meeting, is that he's done everything in his power to have the best cardiovascular base as possible and put himself in the best position to win this fight. I do think it stands to reason, if the fight is contested early on the feet, that Stipe can land some shots and look better than whatever the betting line suggests he is. I mean, I was talking to some of my contemporaries, I think years ago, to your point, when this fight was first inked, and I was like, man, Stipe plus 290, like against any man? And they're just like, dude, he's fighting Jon Jones, who is not any man. And I guess that is true. And so I think Stipe at 42 is not like a handicapper's dream. But what kind of training camp has preceded this fight for Stipe? What kind of training camp has Jon Jones had? I can't wait to sit down with these two individuals in the fighter meeting. But yes, this fight needs to happen, Mike, in the worst possible way. We need November 16th. We need clarity and finality and a result when it comes to these two absolute legends.
All right, everybody. UFC 309 coming up in a matter of days. The promotion's annual trip to Madison Square Garden. It's the return of Jon Jones, the return of Stipe Miocic as they battle for the heavyweight title. We got Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira getting ready to do the dance for the second time in the 5-round co-main event and much more. And the great Jon Anik, who will be calling the action, joins us once again, so you know it's a special card. Jon, how are you, sir?
The decent Jon Anik is thrilled to be with you. I'm doing great, my man. You know, I'm doing great. I'm glad you're not going to Turkey to get a hair transplant. I think you look outstanding.
Not doing it. I refuse to do it. I have suffered the loss, and I wear it with pride. But before we hit UFC 309, we had UFC 308 just a couple of weeks ago. We saw huge performances from a lot of fighters, most notably Ilia Topuria and Khamzat Chimaev. And you had the best seat in the house for Topuria's knockout of Max Holloway and Chimaev's teeth-shattering submission of Robert Whittaker. Big takeaways from those outings once the headset came off.
So you and I have talked extensively about Sean Strickland and how much he has stepped up for the UFC. We could go on and on. I could truly spend 60 seconds right now laying it all out. But wasn't a great night for him when you look at what Khamzat Chimaev was able to accomplish there against Robert Whittaker. Bro, you got to be kidding me with this guy, man. You know, I was just asked to do a word association with Khamzat Chimaev, and I think I might have said electric, but there is just something undeniable about this guy, I think, at this point in time on the heels of that performance, at least in terms of his next fight being for a world title. And I don't know, man, like for me, based upon what I saw at UFC 308, I'm not sure my appetite is stronger for any singular matchup than Dricus du Plessis in title defense against Khamzat Chimaev, you know, even though Sean Strickland is as worthy as any number one contender. So that's my biggest takeaway. Ilia Topuria might be the best athlete on the roster. Forget the pound for pound conversation that for whatever reason seems to dominate headlines of late. But Ilia Topuria could go play shortstop in Major League Baseball. Wouldn't you like to see him step into the batter's box, Michael? You know, field a ground ball? Blown away by what he was able to do. And it's crazy to think in a calendar year in which Alex Pereira has stepped up so many times and performed as admirably as he has, that the fighter of the year conversation is actually open and Ilia Topuria might, you know, split the vote. Just an incredible, incredible card. And I knew that those last two fights at UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi was bulletproof matchmaking, and yet just played out with crazy things to talk about. And here we are a few weeks later.
Yeah, it was the way that card ended was unbelievable because like we do the watch parties and I make a few bets and I bet Max Holloway via the point spread in this fight. I thought plus 5.5. You can't kill Max Holloway. He's unkillable. And then to see him get knocked out like that, I was stunned. Wasn't stunned Ilia won. I was stunned to see Max on the canvas like that and Ilia celebrating over his body, which is down on the mat. It was just crazy to watch. And now Holloway says his featherweight days are probably over. He's heading to 155 for the foreseeable future. And there's obviously a lot of fun fights up there, Jon. You and I are in the same boat when it comes to the lightweight division. But because of that, it doesn't get much easier for Max Blessed Holloway. Do you like the move to 55 full time?
Yes, he has told me in past UFC fighter meetings that he wants to take a UFC fight at 85 before all is said and done. I certainly think it is within the realm of possibility to be sure that he'll fight at welterweight before all is said and done. I can't wait to watch Max Holloway at 155 pounds, and to what degree there will be a concerted effort by Darren Yap and the strength and conditioning folks there to put on more muscle for the weight class, I don't know. Performed pretty damn well at UFC 300 against one of the weight class's true elites in Justin Gaethje. So is he title shot worthy right now against Islam Makhachev? He's legendary, so I don't really have a problem with it. Certainly Arman Tsarukyan is going to handle his business, and those guys might have to fight a third time depending on what happens there. We have a lightweight title eliminator, as you know, happening at UFC 309, and 5 rounds needed for that. But there are big matchups for Max Holloway. I guess for me, I'm looking for fresh matchups, whether that's a fresh matchup for Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje or Max Holloway. I know there's a lot of connective tissue there, but I don't know how you feel, but not unlike what Brandon Moreno just experienced against Amir Albazi. I'm looking for some fresh meat, Mike.
There's so many fun fights. Holloway versus Dan Hooker is fun. I mean, hell, if we do Holloway versus Islam Makhachev down the road, like if he goes and wins a fight and it lines up, because I wanted Max Holloway versus Khabib when they made that switch that never came to fruition. I was like, man, that would have been really interesting to watch, but yeah, just there's a lot of fun up there for Max. Him and Fiziev sometime is ridiculous.
Holloway's got a belt, right? Find another bad motherfucker and put him in a bracket, right? I mean, if he were to defend that BMF title, there's so many different guys, right? If Max Holloway fights Dan Hooker in a co-main event that's 5 rounds, why would that not be for the BMF title? Do you see? Don't hunt.
It's got to be.
Can't kill. Right over my left shoulder.
I want Charles Oliveira. That's the fight I want.
Oh,
because we never got to see that one, really.
Yeah. Saskatoon, right?
Yes. It was I was so looking forward to that one, and it ended so abruptly in such an unfortunate way. I talked to Charles about that yesterday. He was like, hell yeah, that's a great legacy fight for me, and I would love to see that. But of course, he's got business at UFC 309, so let's turn the page to MSG. Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. You and I are in the same boat, John. We host shows and podcasts all the time. I feel like I have been talking about this fight for a decade at this point, because it is definitely the most discussed fight we have ever had on BTL over the last couple of years. And I think fans and the MMA community as a whole, we just want this to happen so we can get things moving at heavyweight. But no arguing, John. These are 2 huge names, and anytime Jon Jones fights, it's a very big deal. Your thoughts on Jones-Miocic finally happening, just days away from it?
Well, I don't try to get too predictive in some part because I am a play-by-play announcer, but how do you really predict what you're going to see out of both of these athletes, right? The sample size for Jon Jones at heavyweight is small, and Stipe Miocic last competed against Francis Ngannou when he was 38, and he is now 42 years of age. Now, one thing I can tell you, without sitting down with Stipe in a fighter meeting, is that he's done everything in his power to have the best cardiovascular base as possible and put himself in the best position to win this fight. I do think it stands to reason, if the fight is contested early on the feet, that Stipe can land some shots and look better than whatever the betting line suggests he is. I mean, I was talking to some of my contemporaries, I think years ago, to your point, when this fight was first inked, and I was like, man, Stipe plus 290, like against any man? And they're just like, dude, he's fighting Jon Jones, who is not any man. And I guess that is true. And so I think Stipe at 42 is not like a handicapper's dream. But what kind of training camp has preceded this fight for Stipe? What kind of training camp has Jon Jones had? I can't wait to sit down with these 2 individuals in the fighter meeting. But yes, this fight needs to happen, Mike, in the worst possible way. We need November 16th. We need clarity and finality and a result when it comes to these 2 absolute legends.
John's been teasing retirement. Stipe seems to be maybe heading in that direction, but as Stipe typically does, he keeps things quite vague, will never officially show his hand. And then you have Dana White saying, look, when these guys are coming up, somebody, whether it be Shogun Rua or Fabricio Verdum, these guys gave Jones and Stipe their opportunity to fight for an undisputed heavyweight title, and it would only be right if Jones and Stipe gave that same opportunity to Tom Aspinall, who is the freaking interim champion and has been for a year. And then John talks to Kevin Ilia yesterday as we record and says, essentially, if I fight again, Tom Aspinall hasn't done enough, so to speak. I'd rather fight Alex Pereira. Is this just let's just stir the pot heel work from Jon Jones, in your opinion? Or do you think, look, Pereira's the bigger name, the bigger fight, let's make that money before we actually walk away from this thing?
Well, certainly it stands to reason that Alex Pereira may be the bigger money fight. It may not be the fight that has the greater fan appetite, but maybe it is, right? Poatan versus Jon Jones is absolutely enormous, right? But there are a lot of us that operate as true diehard sports fans in a meritocracy in our brains and just don't sit well with this interim champion who has already defended the title idling or sitting pat, especially when you look at how good Tom Aspinall is across every aspect of mixed martial arts. But what is Jon Jones's net worth, right? What is Stipe Miocic's net worth, right? What does your financial advisor, Mike, tell you you need to retire? Because I can assure you, I'm not retiring, in terms of what you actually need. And so Jon Jones fighting Tom Aspinall or Alex Pereira, what does he make? $15 million? Is that worth it? Is that worth risking the O? I don't know. But if Jon Jones is worth $25, $30 million, and it stands to reason there are a lot of opportunities for him to make money beyond fighting, I don't know. If you were his manager, would you tell him to risk the O and legacy because he should fight Tom because Tom's got the interim belt and Tom's the fucking man, right? I don't know that you do that. I don't love, you could be sure. I shouldn't say this, but I would submit to you that for Dana White and Hunter Campbell, they would much rather make a Jon Jones-Tom Aspinall fight than inject Alex Pereira into the equation. But Jon Jones does have status as the greatest mixed martial arts athlete of all time. So if he wants to fight Poatan, I'd imagine promotionally you would listen.
Twitter was like blowing up yesterday with like people surprised by this. And I'm just like, why are you so surprised by this? Jon has been telling us this for a year that he wants to fight Alex Pereira because it would be such a legacy fight for him. Pereira gets a shot at 3 belts. We could have a true pound for pound conversation. Pereira could potentially be the quote unquote GOAT, all of that. This is not a surprise. I don't understand why there's such uproar about this when Jon has been talking about this for so long, Jon.
First things first, right? And as the betting line continues to widen between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic, let's beat the most decorated heavyweight of all time first before we open up this can. But you're right. I was surprised at the fan uproar. And certainly we are in a clippy world where everything gets clipped off and it's either got to be 60 seconds or 8 minutes if you're trying to make money or whatever the fuck, right? But even when I suggest that Jon Jones has hung 15 championship banners and doesn't need a 16th, I get all sorts of different things when it comes to fan opinion. And I'm just calling it like I see it. And I just don't know that that is the fight that is going to be of appetite for Jon Jones because he would be, I think, in a different bracket when it comes to the betting line, right? I mean, I think he would be favored against Alex Pereira, to be sure. He would be favored against Tom Aspinall, but to what extent, I don't know. But yeah, man. It's Johnny Bones' world. He just has to handle business as a prohibitive, I would suggest, favorite this next weekend here at 309.
You've been around Stipe for a long time, and regardless of how old he is and what we see from him, this is a guy who does his best work when nobody thinks he can win. I remember UFC 220, specifically in Boston, one of the first pay-per-view fight weeks I've ever covered in person, and Stipe was just on another planet, just with anger and piss and vinegar and this chip that was on his shoulder. And that was the first time he fought Francis Ngannou. And he thought the entire promotional build was, look at this monster Francis Ngannou who hits like a freaking car running somebody over. He's going to win the heavyweight title. He's our guy. And then Stipe goes in there and wins. And he wouldn't even let Dana put the freaking belt around his waist. And he was pretty pissed off afterwards. And then it set up the big fight with Daniel Cormier. If Stipe Miocic wins, I speak for myself and the rest of the team at MMA Fighting. It would be one of the funniest things to ever happen in the sport. It would just be such a curveball. It would destroy so many storylines and narratives. It would be absolutely insane if this happens. But here's the biggest question I have regarding this fight. Does a Stipe Miocic win help Tom Aspinall at all? Because if he does beat Jon Jones, a rematch would be absolutely massive, with Jon chasing back his first non-DQ loss. A ton of money on the table for Stipe, potentially. I could see him sticking around for one more to rematch Jon, to have Jon be the one climbing the ladder. Do you believe Tom could still be in limbo, so to speak, regardless of what happens at UFC 309?
Yeah, this is the fight game, right? I mean, Bilal Muhammad now has a life-threatening injury, right? And had that happened during his training camp for Leon Edwards, he probably never gets that undisputed championship opportunity. So yes, it's crazy to sort of think about the prospects for Tom Aspinall, no matter who wins this fight. I will say to you, if Stipe Miocic wins this fight, and you have me thinking about how I would cap it were he to do so. But if Stipe Miocic wins this fight, I think he will fight Tom Aspinall. And if it's a relatively quick fight, maybe in short order to try to realize that payday. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Stipe want to make one title defense against Tom Aspinall and then ride off into the sunset. But I don't know without having sat down with these individuals. And if you think Stipe is going to be wicked forthcoming, then you've never met the man, you know? So we'll see how it all plays out. I feel pretty convicted in saying that Tom Aspinall is going to realize financial freedom for his family, hopefully for generations, and just needs his opportunity. But man, it's a tough world for a lot of these fighters when you get very close to the top. Sometimes you have to wait forever, and sometimes you feel like it's never going to come.
Yeah, we will see what happens there and what this heavyweight division looks like heading into 2025. We also have Iron Michael Chandler returning for the first time in 2 years, back in the same building where he had that classic with Dustin Poirier. He will not be fighting Conor McGregor. He'll be fighting Charles Oliveira in a rematch, and their first fight was an absolute classic. I have a hard time believing this one is not in the same realm, John. I can't wait for this fight.
I thought you might lead with this. This is insane. Michael Chandler was so close to winning the world championship against Charles Oliveira. What type of Michael Chandler is showing up at UFC 309? I don't even want to begin to think what is going to be coursing through that man's veins when he hits the inspection zone. And he is fighting maybe the most accomplished fighter in UFC history when you think about all things that are in octagon accomplishment. 155 pounds being the toughest division. Charles Oliveira, most decorated finisher in UFC history, winning the undisputed championship, defending it, getting it completely hosed in Arizona, everything that led to that. You know, this fight is insane to me. I can't put it to you with any clarity or articulation. I am so excited. I'm so glad it's 5 rounds. I do think that Michael Chandler and the balls to the wall style is going to accompany him to the Mecca on November 16th. You know, I don't think that he's going to be deviant in terms of approach. I just can't wait to see it, right? I wish I was tougher. I would just punch this glass window in front of me and try to get all bloody right now to show you my enthusiasm. I can't wait, man. I just cannot wait. Is that okay analysis for this fight? Like, I just think that if you suggest Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway, and Khamzat, Chimaev, Robert Whitaker are fight fans' dreams, this is right there with it. Right there with it.
Yeah, if you're a newer fan and you're watching this right now, you've never seen Chandler Oliveira 1, go watch it. Just turn this off and go watch it and then come back to this because it's so good. But if I told you in January, February during one of our many conversations that, hey, John, I'm going to make a prediction. Michael Chandler's next fight in the UFC is going to be against Charles Oliveira. Would you have thought I was absolutely nuts?
Not necessarily. I'm not sure that you would have come up with this broad list of names, right? If Conor McGregor was out of the equation, right? It probably wasn't going to be Islam Makhachev, right? So how many people were there really going to be for Michael Chandler? And this rematch made sense because think about how excited you and I are getting when we just think about the way their first meeting went. So I actually thought this fight did make some sense. You know, did a Dan Hooker rematch make sense? Not nearly as much. You know, I think there were other fights at 55. I wouldn't mind seeing Max Holloway and Michael Chandler at some point in time. As I have said, like the fresh matchups, but this is kind of a rematch that had to happen. And if you can't be fighting for the championship, I think being the co-main event at the Mecca, world's most famous arena, just underneath Jon Jones, the greatest of all time, you can't do much better than that. But I just can't wait to see what version of Chandler shows up, right? If possible, to be in a better place and shape in terms of the strength and conditioning. It seems like he's actually there. And Charles Oliveira is just getting better. You know, Arman Tsarukyan, UFC 300, great training camp, really competitive fight, entertaining fight. Charles Oliveira is the man. You know, I want a Dubronx tattoo, but I just don't know what to get.
Yeah, he's very focused. I spoke to Charles yesterday. Dude is locked in. He is locked in for this fight, and it just got me even more excited because Dana White has said this is a #1 contender fight at 155, and I saw a lot of pushback about this because, and then I thought about it. Dustin Poirier just fought for the belt, and it was a great fight with Islam Makhachev. And then there's, like you said, the worst kept secret in the business right now is that the UFC is looking to do Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2 next, looking like January right now as being the front running time frame. It kind of feels like with the state of this division as loaded as it is, the winner of this fight has a tremendous case for a title shot. Even Michael Chandler, who has lost 3 of his last 4, there is no upfront guy outside of Arman Tsarukyan right now. The only fighter that is currently in the top 10 that is not named Arman Tsarukyan, that is coming off of a win right now, is Dan Hooker. That's it. And Arman Tsarukyan. Those are the only 2 guys. Everybody else is coming off of a loss right now. This is wide freaking open, John.
So I don't know what you do with the Dan Hooker, Max Holloway situation here. But if Michael Chandler were to knock out Charles Oliveira at UFC 309, I think Michael Chandler's next fight would in all likelihood be for the world title. And for Charles Oliveira, he is always right there. And of course, we want to see him against Islam Makhachev again. And any fight involving Charles Oliveira is worth signing up for. I mean, Charles Oliveira, Dan Hooker's a dream fight. So there's a lot of these names right here. Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, as you mentioned. But yeah, I mean, Michael Chandler, I do think, has the world a little bit at his fingertips because of the sacrifices that he did make in terms of, I don't know that it's a bad thing in terms of him, pushing the reset button a little bit and taking some time. I mean, you don't have to worry about him in terms of the shape that he is in. But I do think that he is in good stead. He's established a lot of goodwill. And if he has a big performance that results in any sort of concussion on the other side, I think there's a great chance that he fights for the world title after Arman.
What a freaking fight. We have Bo Nickel, Paul Craig, Karine Silva, Viviane Araujo, Mauricio Huffy versus James Lontop. Chris Weidman returns to MSG against Eric Anders. We get Jim effing Miller back against Damon Jackson. Jonathan Martinez versus Marcus McGee. To me, that is the low-key banger of UFC 309. Jonathan Martinez trying to bounce back from the loss to Jose Aldo. Marcus McGee has looked like an absolute killer, but now he gets a big step up in competition. Do you agree with me that's a low-key banger of the card, or do you have something else in mind?
No, I love it. Marcus McGee, I think recently was quoted as saying that he's number 42 in the world, right? Or something crazy. Now, I don't think he's that low, right? Maybe he's just having fun, but he's the man, right? MMA Lab, legendary sparring Saturdays, great fighter. It obviously speaks to the depth of the division, but Marcus McGee's favored to beat Jonathan Martinez. And Martinez was all the rage going into the Jose Aldo fight. So, yeah, I mean, that fight obviously jumps off the card to you, to me, and just we'll see the extent to which Martinez can bounce back. This Mauricio Rufy, of course, in a showcase spot. It's going to be exciting to see Weidman make the walk. And when I talk about fighter electricity and I talk about Khamzat Chimaev, if you have sort of a pie chart, or pie chart's not the term. God, see, I get out of my lane. I'm not a mathematician, right? But if you have sort of like a pyramid, and Khamzat Chimaev is at the top of just electricity in terms of maybe my heart rate when a fighter races to the octagon or does whatever he does, right? The commission doesn't even want to take the guy off the top of the octagon right before the fight happens. Bo Nickel's right there on his heels. Raul Rosas Jr., because he is like 14, is also part of the equation for me, but these guys who have this undeniable electricity when they compete, whether it's expectation based upon a skill set or whatever it is, Bo Nickel minus 1,000 against a guy who has fought 18 times in the UFC, and Paul Craig. Live on pay-per-view, UFC 309, Mike Heck, let's go.
Couple more things. You mentioned Bilal Muhammad and the injury that he's dealing with. First title defense, obviously going to have to wait, the bone infection. That foot was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. It was just so brutal. You could not look at that and think to yourself, yeah, this guy's fighting in December. There's just no way. And now there's talks the UFC might do an interim title fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov. Perhaps Kamaru Usman steps in there and gets it. And by the time this goes live, perhaps, John, this is the decision they might choose to go. We don't know at this point. So what are your thoughts on doing an interim title in this spot, especially with Bilal saying, look, he's headed to your brother. It's not like I'm out for 6 months or a year. I got to take 6 weeks off and then I can slowly start working my way back. It's not going to be like I'm gone forever. Are you okay with this, considering it's essentially a number one contender fight? We're putting a belt on and a couple more bucks in these fighters' pockets.
So people have a lot stronger opinions on this than I do. I thought Ray Longo brought up some interesting points on the Anik and Florian podcast on Thursday Live, just talking about psychologically that maybe you wouldn't want to undercut Bilal Muhammad, who just won the belt and was stepping up for the UFC, putting it on the line just 4.5 months later. Bilal Muhammad needs to focus on his health, right? He's not supposed to sweat for 6 to 8 weeks. And I'm not sure that is a harder initiative for any athlete on the roster than Bilal Muhammad, right? To just have to shut it down. So maybe that's a good thing, right? Would a fight between Bilal Muhammad and Shavkat Rakhmonov be bigger if Shavkat is an interim champion? I don't know. I do think there is some promotional appetite, and I don't have any inside knowledge to preserve that fight between Shavkat and Bilal, because I think they think it's an exciting fight and a really big fight, despite sometimes the way fans want to denigrate the Muhammad side of things, So I think there's some appetite to preserve that fight. I was a little bit surprised to see them book Ian Machado Gary against Joaquin Buckley, because I think Ian Machado Gary, in terms of health and overall body of work, strength of schedule, Shavkat Rakhmonov and Ian Machado Gary for an interim welterweight championship would have made some sense. But I do think that if you don't need a title fight on Larry Bird's birthday, December 7th, then you showcase your flyweight champion Alexandre Pantoja against Kai Asakura, then you just do Bilal Shavkat and you just hope that Bilal can return to health. I think the big concern is that Mr. Muhammad, they got to shut this guy down, Bilal, So we just got to see what happens. But I love the way Shavkat just sort of toasted to Muhammad's health. And welterweight is certainly an embarrassment of riches. I mean, people trot out the name three-name Jack Della Maddalena, seemingly not healthy yet. But I just love the fact that Machado Gary's stepping up. Buckley, gosh, man, I wouldn't want to play any sport against Joaquin Buckley right now. I wouldn't want to fight him in a setting. That dude's the biggest power threat in the division right now. So good things at welterweight, and we wish good health for the champ.
Joaquin Buckley is the reason why you're never down and out in MMA, because Joaquin Buckley, I roasted that man after the Conor McGregor call out. I thought it was one of the worst call outs ever. I'm just like DC was in that aspect, and I didn't think he could even recover from it, really. And then he comes out and does what he did against Stephen Thompson. His attitude was better. I thought the call out of Usman was fantastic. Everything he did in Salt Lake City was terrific. And I was like, man, I didn't think this was possible. He completely flipped me in a matter of months. So shout out to Joaquin Buckley. Now he gets this big fight with Ian Machado Gary, and it all works out for him in the end. And that's just how crazy this sport can be. And I did want to bring up one more thing, and it's always tough to end these conversations on a somber note, but we did find out during the UFC Edmonton broadcast that Derek Thompson had passed away at the age of 39. And it was a shock to everybody and everyone that knew him. Brendan Fitzgerald had a great tribute, Daniel Cormier, et cetera. And he was a big part of the production team. He seemed universally loved by everybody who ever had the opportunity to speak with him or run into him. And I don't think I ever had the honor of meeting Derek. I've read some articles about him, found out that he was a fellow Massachusetts guy growing up, and man, 39, just very, very sad news. Can you put into words, if you even can, your reaction to this news and maybe shed some light on who Derek was as a person, as a colleague, and as a friend?
Well, thank you. I still don't think that I have actually comprehended what happened. I had my last conversation with him at Power Slap in Abu Dhabi a few weeks ago, and then he passed away a few days later upon returning to his home in Las Vegas. So Derek and I go way back. He is a longtime friend and best friend of our great executive producer, Zach Candido. They went to high school together, and the three of us were working together at ESPN. I want to say 2008, 2009. We played on a rec basketball league together. Derek played basketball in college at Bridgewater State University, so he was absolutely the man on our rec team, just dunking on individuals that had no business being on the same court with him. But yes, I mean, gentle giant, I think, is sort of a trite phrase, but it really applies to this guy. There's not a person on the crew who would have a bad word to say about D-Rock, about D-Tomp. And if I passed away, there are plenty of people on the crew that would probably have a bad word to say about me, right? So he really did just appeal to everybody. He was always additive in terms of what he brought to the experience. But I just don't know that I am even able to properly mourn him. I couldn't even get through the great tribute they did on the UFC telecast. And my heart just goes out to my dear friend, Zach Candido, and his family. His son, Miles, and Derek had just such a special bond. And Yeah, man, it's heavy. It really is. You know, this UFC crew, we've lost so many individuals that I'm so close to. Our lead pay-per-view producer, Bruce Connell, our makeup artist, Susie Freeton, who is my best friend in the world. On and on it goes. So this one is just particularly tough to swallow because I just don't know that there are any even answers yet. But we will be celebrating this man as best we can. And thanks for a chance to share a few words about a man who is just the real article in every way.
Anyone that I talked to about this has said everybody has a Derek Thompson story. Like if anyone was asked, like, give me your best story about Derek Thompson, there's probably like a list of 5 to 10 that come to the top of your mind. What's one that comes to your mind?
There are so many, but certainly recently he had expressed interest in some Anik and Florian podcast t-shirts, but this dude don't check his mail, right? So we sent him 4 t-shirts, the Kenny Florian Wolverine design. So whoever has those 4 t-shirts, hopefully you wear them loud and proud for D-Rock because they were delivered on September 9th and he never got them. And we had a conversation about that in Abu Dhabi, but he was always so supportive of me. And he saw me when, you know, I was 170 pounds in a closet, you know, twitching and I couldn't read a teleprompter. And he was just such a great friend. And yeah, man, it's just, this one's tough, man. I mean, they're all tough, but trying to figure out how to properly pay tribute and, you know, just haven't quite figured out the action and trying to figure out the words as best I can.
Well, I think one great way you'll be able to do that is by having your voice be heard on the broadcast of UFC 309, along with Daniel Cormier. I assume the powerful Joe Rogan will be there as well at the world's most famous arena. You get to watch John Jones make the walk against Stipe Miocic. You get to watch Michael Chandler return against Charles freaking Oliveira and all the other terrific fights that are going to be happening at the world's most famous arena at UFC 309. John, I appreciate the time. Appreciate you sharing some fond memories, and my heart goes out to you and the rest of the crew and everybody who has ever met Derek, his family. And there is a GoFundMe out there. I know you've shared it and a lot of other people have as well. So if you want to help out his family, you can do that. And yeah, it's on to MSG, John. I appreciate the time as always.
My man, you're the man. Yeah, the GoFundMe to support his mom, Gail, and there is a celebration of life the day after UFC 309 in his native Massachusetts. But yeah, man, we'll chop it up on the other side, and we'll see who gets the loudest ovation at Madison Square Garden, Jon Jones, Chris Weidman, or Charles Oliveira. Don't be surprised if Duke Bronx gets the crowd's biggest support come Saturday night.